Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Boardroom, where, as always, we're having conversations with some of Malta's leading business minds, as well as the people who have the most impact on Malta's business community. As always, we are live on Facebook, and we'd love to put your questions to today's interviewee if you have any, so please do add them below. But if you don't manage to catch this live, it can be streamed back on who'swho.mt, Malta's leading business portal. Now, today, I'm very honored to have with us a special guest. We're going to be joined by Roberta Metsola. I'm sure she needs very little introduction, but for those who might not know, Roberta Metsola is the first Vice President of the European Parliament and the first Maltese national to hold this very important post. She's a lawyer specialized in EU law, and she was first elected as member of the European Parliament for Malta and Gozo in 2013, becoming one of our country's first female MEPs. She is married to Ukko, and she is mum to 4 wonderful boys. And today we're going to find out why she thinks this is our once-in-a-generation chance to use EU funds to radically shift Malta's economic landscape. Roberta, lovely to see you as always. Great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for inviting me. Very much looking forward to the few minutes we have ahead of us.
Absolutely. So we've had a few questions from viewers already, Roberta, but until then, there's a few questions I'd love to sort of discuss ourselves. Most of what we're going to be discussing today is business related, as you know. But as I said, if our viewers have any questions, they're very welcome to add them. As you very openly said, you're happy to sort of have a great discussion with them as well as with me. So first up, Malta has been a member state of the EU for 17 years now. And, in general, of course, we've benefited greatly from our membership. Pre-COVID, which sectors of the economy, in your view, would you say have benefited the most?
Well, thanks, Joe. First of all, the figures show that most sectors of our economy have benefited. Our economic growth has been consistent year on year, and that is no coincidence. Of course, there have been sectors that struggled. We still have quite a lot of challenges, but if we look back and we see how well we had prepared, and that we never doubted that Maltese businesses could very much adapt to this very big economic challenge that they were presented with. Looking back over these 17 years, the Maltese economy has benefited of over 660 million euros to our GDP, and I think that alone is also testament to the faith and vision that our country has had in 2003 when it decided to go with a referendum to join this large economic and political bloc.
Okay. Thank you. And in its winter report issued last month, the EC noted that Malta's economy had shrunk severely last year, but that it is expected to grow by 4.5% this year, and with further expansion into 2022. At this stage, how realistic do you think this outlook remains, considering that recent measures now have taken us back into sort of a semi-lockdown? And of course, we are still so reliant on tourism. Do you think we're going to recover in the same way that was predicted?
Well, I would certainly, Joe, like to see a 4.5% growth as predicted, but we, of course, need to be realists. And while we have to do our very best, we need to prepare for the worst. If we see, for example, a report that Chamber of Commerce has issued, it found that Maltese businesses are much more skeptical than their non-Maltese counterparts in other countries about their profitability. So only 38% of those surveyed said that they expect to see profits next year. So of course, COVID has hit us very, very hard, and it will be difficult to bounce back immediately from that. But we do have access, and I'm hoping we can get to discuss this a little bit more here, to an unprecedented, once-in-a-lifetime amount of money in terms of funds and loans. We still have a good debt to GDP ratio, and our vaccination rate is going well in terms of its speed. So once we are going towards having quite a good part of our population vaccinated, we can really start to see ourselves bouncing back. In a nutshell, however, we need to give our businesses access to support, certainty of that support, and clarity going forward. And for them to do that, they need to see faster, better responses from our politicians, from our leaders, and not just empty headlines.
Okay. I know that many members of the business community fear that 2021 might actually be harder than 2020, and possibly that hardship is going to continue. First up, do you agree with those concerns from the community? And if so, which sectors are going to be the ones that are hit hardest?
So that's always a consideration, and we are looking at the sectors and seeing exactly how they will bounce back. If we look at our tourism sector, how well can we go from essentially 0 to 100%, but also how people's perceptions and attitudes continue to evolve, whether they will continue to prioritize saving rather than spending, and whether there will be a framework that is created for the funds that I've just described to be able to trickle down to the backbone of our economy. So all family-run businesses, all our SMEs. We've also seen this week, actually, and last few days, the idea that in order to restart tourism, is we will have a common COVID so-called vaccination certificate, not passport. I want to make it clear, because it was called a passport before, but we need to make sure that this is not a barrier to travel. But this is essentially to make it clear uniformly, not to allow some countries to go forward in a faster way, but in allowing those countries whose people are vaccinated or who have taken a negative test, for them to be able to move more freely. And I think once you get that rolling in summer, as is predicted by the European Commission, which is piloting this, then we will be able to see, let's say, those sectors that have been hit the hardest, like tourism, to start to slowly recover.
Okay, and that's interesting there, Roberta. Could you explain a little bit more about what this sort of non-passport is going to look like as it currently stands?
Well, what we have been very, very, let's say, firm on is that we wanted a coordinated approach. What we were seeing a few weeks ago is that some countries were going to go by themselves in identifying this so-called possibility to travel, other countries being more hesitant by saying this could be discriminatory, especially for those countries where the rollout has been slower. So the European Commission immediately came forward through Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and said, look, okay, we are going to streamline this. And last week, the model was agreed upon, which will allow a uniform way of showing whether you've been vaccinated. It was clear also, of course, that member states and different countries will need to decide as to whether they accept vaccinations from pharmaceutical companies that have not yet been authorized by the EU, but it will also make it clear whether you are traveling with a negative test or not. And that, of course, once you streamline it, then you cut the abuse. At the moment, even today, if you open our national news portals, you see, for example, that quite regularly people are getting caught with falsified certificates. Mm-hmm. Wherever there's a loophole, you have abuse. And this is exactly what that certificate seems to do. Streamline a coordinated approach by the European Union to open up again and make it possible for people to move.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. Now, we've had some people on the show before who've been very vocal about how hard hit their businesses have been by the pandemic. And what are your thoughts? Has the government done enough to keep Malta and its businesses going during the pandemic?
Look, I think, and I certainly understand the pressure that the government has been under. I think with regards to vaccine procurement and joint procurement of medical equipment such as ventilators was done very well. And that was also thanks to Malta being a member of the European Union and making sure that no discrimination is felt as to the kind of size of your country, that you're not economically competing with larger, more economically wealthy countries. So that was done, I think, well. But what I would say is that this government lacks the ability and has, I think, failed quite completely in leading, in looking at the industry, stakeholders, business representatives, people who have sacrificed a lot over this last year, restaurant owners, in the eye and told them that, yes, we are facing difficulties. We are not the only country that is facing this very unprecedented pandemic. And I think we would have done much better if our leaders did not use, cheap headlines or pretended that waves are in the sea. In order for us to have this sort of false impression that things were actually better than they are. And I think when it's really comes to a situation where countries are going through a difficult time and have big challenges, that's when true leadership and understanding that you need to communicate hard truths comes into play. We did not see enough of that. If anything, we hardly saw any of that. And I understand the concerns of those who have been on your show and saying that communication should have been better, messaging should have been done better, and also an understanding and respect for those who are really sacrificing a lot and have already done so.
Mm-hmm. And if we look to the future now, I mean, a lot has changed since the start of the pandemic, and will continue to sort of change as we go forward over the next few months. You know, what does Malta need to do now in order to sort of look at it from a vision perspective and remain competitive? I'm hearing sort of stories about international investment being limited, expats who prior to this, you know, were very happy to live in Malta, but are now, you know, not feeling like the vision for the country is as aligned as it was before, and therefore leaving, real estate being impacted, etc. What do we need to do to get back to being competitive?
Well, I think we need to give our businesses, both local and those who are seeking to invest from outside the country, confidence. First of all, confidence in their capabilities, but also confidence that government will give indiscriminate access in order to allow them to operate fairly and in a transparent manner. I have been approached by a lot of businesses who are worried that this money, the funds and the grants that have been, let's say, allocated to Malta will not trickle down to the level that they should trickle down, that there will be too much bureaucracy. I think that the Chamber of Commerce and the Malta Chamber of SMEs have issued excellent proposals and suggestions as to what to do and how to make sure that the framework is accessible, is transparent, is communicable, and it would be good for the government to actually study these suggestions seriously. I think also, in a nutshell, if we look at the concerns that are constantly raised, they are not new, but we need to tackle them seriously, such as the much-needed revamp of the way public procurement is carried out, rising costs of rent, electricity, and all ancillary services. There is not one sector that COVID hasn't hit, whether directly or indirectly. And effectively, what we need to guarantee is that whoever wants to invest or who already has invested is not effectively priced out of the market. It's a big challenge, but we can do it because we have this unprecedented amount of funds that are that are going to be injected into our economy, and that economy needs to make sure that it uses those funds to be able to bounce back.
Okay, now let's talk there about this unprecedented amount of funds, because again, as somebody in business, this sounds really exciting. It sounds like an opportunity that shouldn't be missed. But again, to people watching today, what do we need to do to access these funds? Is this only at government level, or is it also at business and individual level?
So at the moment, what government have been asked to do is draft the so-called National Action Plan. It's the National Action Plan that will seek to tap into the so-called recovery and resilience facility that is aimed at supporting investment and reforms. This has to be done both from a public perspective, but also from a private sector. And member states, including Malta, and this is where we expect more transparency from the government in setting out a comprehensive package of both public investment projects and reforms that will benefit the industry and the private sector by 2026. So this is the period of time we are looking at in order to try to recover the lost ground. There are priority areas that are set. In other words, governments cannot decide, let's say, to build more high rises or tarmac more roads. These are projects and priorities that are, for example, about powering up clean technologies and renewables, how to modernize and streamline and make our public administration more digital, better, how to have better energy efficient buildings in terms of renovation, restoring old buildings, how to scale up our data cloud capacities and sustainable processes, how to recharge and refuel. We talk about sustainable transport, but yet again, we're less sustainable in our projects than we were in 2015. How to reskill and upskill our people in terms of education and training to support, at times, a hugely lacking digital skill scale. And finally, how to have better broadband service and more efficient service rollout. Here, for example, I think about the need to digitalize GoZo. Once we are have spent a year teleworking, are we really going to go back to being stuck in our roads full of traffic and fumes? Can't we make use of this new way of working and make sure that everybody is better connected? Make, again, GoZo this international mecca, as has been done in other islands across the world, where people have flown there specifically to spend their time during this difficult period in order to telework and work remotely. We can do a lot, and it is these projects that will be able to succeed in accessing these funds, on which there is going to be quite a lot of control. But ultimately, if the way the bureaucratic hurdles have clogged up our system are addressed, then I am convinced that we can see a better rollout of these funds and grants that go to all sectors of our economy.
Okay. And to shift the conversation slightly, but sort of staying very relevant, if we look at Brexit at the moment and how that is impacting us, I mean, on the ground, Maltese businesses being affected by the fact that goods can't reach us the way they used to, obviously costs for importation, etc. Roberta, how do you expect that to pan out? Are things going to get better, or is it going to become a real issue for the EU to do business with the UK?
Well, challenges are ongoing. If anything, if we look at the very difficult processes leading up to Brexit, only then to see for example, already this sort of trade war on exportation of vaccines, etc. That is not going to be easy at all over the next few weeks and months. I've also been approached not only about consumer goods, as you said, but also buying online and importing, but also, for example, car importation sector has been affected disproportionately badly because of Brexit. And I'm under no illusion that those challenges will continue to be with us for a very long time. However, just as I am, let's say, very disdainful of EU bashing, I also look with a lot of disdain for UK bashing. I think that's the last thing we need. The UK is our closest trading partner, has to continue being our closest partner economically and nationally, but also historically because of our close ties with regards to education and health, for example. So there is definitely an opportunity for Malta and the government and the opposition and everybody working on in the European institutions in order to make sure that in us as Maltese, the United Kingdom finds reliable and stable and friendly partners that are not in competition with each other, but that rely on each other. Yes, why not? The UK also relies on Malta in order to deliver on its economic targets, for example. So here, I think that we need to, let's say, move away from just looking at Brexit as though, that's a divorce and it's going to be completely, let's say, impossible to recover over the next few years, but rather look at the challenges, address them, and be at the forefront as Malta to create that partnership that is really going to be sorely needed going forward.
Absolutely. Okay, and again, now switching slightly back to the EU and the funds and how they're going to shape our economic model, what would you be saying to any entrepreneurs watching this show, as they so often do? What are the opportunities that COVID could actually create for people who have the energy and who are excited to create them?
Well, I have seen so many new projects that are a result of how our life has changed from, black to white. I don't ever say I want to go back to normal. I say I want to have this new normal where the advantages and the crisis can be turned into opportunity. And that's whether from a digitalization point of view, whether from understanding that meetings that required physical presence can now be done online. That gives you access to more opportunities, more meetings that you can meet at the same time. But also, we need to make sure that our businesses are future-proof. And how can we do that? How can we avoid that any sectors take a hit in the future if another pandemic is upon us? How can we make sure that our insurances, for example, cover situations that are not covered today? How can we, for example, not go from 100% to zero in the tourism sector, that our hotels have not been occupied for over a year now? How can we make sure that our restaurants, our small businesses are given the economic cushion they need in order to be allowed to close, but also keep their employees if they cannot rely on online work? Other than that, I think that we should also look beyond our shores and see which kind of new technologies have been created, how investment is being done in researching newer, cleaner, more efficient transport, understanding our challenges that we are an island and therefore we rely on maritime and aviation as sectors. And therefore, when we're talking about renewable fuels, how can Malta become better in becoming less reliant on fossil fuels, and also at the same time move into more cleaner energy? These are, we should have been discussing this over a decade ago. Let's say at least, but my slight optimism is that we should use this period of time to fast forward to what we should have been doing over the past years, and we simply didn't, because we were either focusing on overdevelopment rather than sustainability, and concrete rather than cleaner air. We need to really face those facts, and we are the large generation, both as politicians but also as private investors and citizens, looking at improving and trying to not only reverse the damage but make sure that we don't continue to destroy our planet and our country at the rate that we are currently doing so.
Yeah. And in fact, you have said in an article on Who's Who, actually, you were quoted as saying that while we are one of the countries that has been committed to protecting the Green Deal, our national results have been shambolic. So again, what do we need to do? It's true. We look outside the window and I, for one, can't believe what I see. And it only feels like it's getting worse, not better. So what should we be doing right now to commit to the Green Deal and making our environment better?
This is going to be one of our largest challenges going forward. The EU has set itself very, very ambitious goals, necessary goals, that we in the European Parliament have pushed quite strongly for. But when we look at what governments are doing on the ground, what countries are doing on the ground, also Malta, you can't seriously stand up and pledge to meet the challenges and then do the complete opposite on the ground just because you have in mind the next billboard and the next election that you will seek to win. I think we have a responsibility as political representatives to look beyond the immediate political cycle and say, how can we put sustainability finally at the very core of our policies? How can we make sure that our economy is no longer linear, which means that you use something and you throw it away? How are we going to move away from this idea that the environment does not create jobs? Because when we're talking about circular economy, which is the word we use, we're talking about jobs and the environment as not being mutually exclusive, because the minute you invest in the environment, you create new jobs. And the minute you create those jobs, you can reinvest into more ambitious environmental targets. So it doesn't, these might be big words, but it comes from all of us, that even if we are going to look at, for example, the new plastics tax that came into force at the beginning of this year, where are we at as a government? Did we consult the industry properly? Did we invest in better technology that we could have in our universities? We have such clever, bright scientists and researchers that are really working hard into investing in and looking at and becoming competitive as new technologies. And sometimes I think one of the things I hate most, Joe, is when people try to pin failures to reach targets because we're small. We are not a small country. We are a proper, ambitious, forward-looking population. And we need to be the ones to challenge to address those challenges and say, we have the best education, we have the best healthcare, we have invested hugely in our people, but now we have to become more competitive. And we can do it if we look beyond empty political slogans and understand the capacity of our people to address the biggest challenges of our time.
Absolutely. And another challenge, of course, that I'm sure comes up in so many of your conversations is the gender side of things. For you, what, if any, major gender-related obstacles did you encounter in your journey to become vice president?
Well, I always like to say that being in politics is not a walk in the park, and being a woman in politics does not make that any easier. And this is, I think, beyond political color, beyond countries, really. If you look at the number of women who have either been candidates or elected, then that number pales in comparison to men. I think in terms of struggles, it meant that you are put on a different footing when it comes to male candidates, even if they have the same amount of children who are the same age as yours. When you are, and this is not only in politics, but applying for jobs, we still have such a big gap in the pay because of simply being a woman. But looking back, I think if I had to look back to the first day of getting elected, so the day before which Malta had no members of the European Parliament, we went from 0 to 3 in one day. And I remember that day thinking that this was a big step forward for those girls looking to politics as not being only a male-dominated world, and that it's not only their father and their brother who could, run companies or be at the very top of the public sector or be at the very top of the political level. That is still a challenge that we need to address. I address it also in my current position in the European Parliament, where the numbers are better than in Malta, but where still a lot of improvement has to be done. And I, for one, spend most of my time actually mentoring and speaking to new candidates, young girls who are looking at politics as something that is not something they have to be cynical about, but really as a value-based life that you choose in order to make the life of others better and easier. I can very much thank those women in Malta in politics who came before me for making this possible for me, for having fought for women to have the vote. But so now it's my responsibility to make sure that I make the path and the life of those girls today easier than me or my generation or those older than us had.
And we've had a question come in on email, actually, from one of our viewers who says, you're a pioneer for women's rights and a prime example of a woman who has not allowed her gender to hold her back from achieving, despite the critics. And she asks, what values are you instilling in your 4 sons so they can be men who respect and support women to reach their goals?
Well, I have brought them up in a way that I don't focus on their gender in my family. I was myself brought up in an all-girls family, and I have 2 extremely talented scientists for sisters. And we were pushed by our father, in order to reach levels that, only men used to do in the past. Now it's my turn to teach exactly that to my 4 boys. Of course, the toughest conversations I have is currently with my 1 soon to be 2 teenagers in the house, where let's say everything has a question mark at the end and everything has to be rebutted. But I also rely on a very good communication strategy inside my family that has different challenges to others, because both my husband and my husband travel quite a lot, and let's say rely on each other's support, and that is what we show by our example to instill in my boys. I still have days when I look at them and I say, have you not learned anything, or how can you even ask that? But I guess that's normal. And I already see a difference between my eldest, who is 14, and my youngest, who is 4, in terms of the way also society has changed over the last 10 years. So, for example, one of the questions my eldest used to get, oh my goodness, do you ever see your mother? Or do you miss your mother? Very few people actually ask that of my youngest son. If anything, they could ask, do you miss your parents, or do you miss your father? It's not only your mother that it has to do, let's say, all the parenting in the house. And I think that's important for them to know too.
That's great. And in line with that, advice for women who might be watching this thinking of a career in politics, what would be your advice there? Because I know it hasn't been easy.
Well, I would say keep fighting, take risks, and be ready to lose in order to win. Once you have those, priorities or principles in mind, then you can really take anything. Also, I think look around and seek advice from other women who have gone through the situation, and don't only let's say, place challenges on you, but ensure that those around you are ready to be able to face those challenges. And then we can all move forward together as a society. I'm convinced of that.
Okay. Another question that came in is asking how you would tackle the extreme level of partisan politics in Malta. And of course, we know this is a big, big challenge for our island and stops us, in my opinion, from moving forward in ways that I believe we could if we didn't have that issue. What are your thoughts?
I would like to stop thinking of our country as a red and blue country. I think that we really need to move away from this ultra-tribal mentality that only seeks to foster hate and division. The amount of people who come to me, as we were talking about younger female candidates, who get insulted in the street, and I'm not referring to any one political party or another, but it's this culture of intimidation, of bullying, of screaming. You know, just because you think you're shouting, your arguments make more sense, and you are talking in order to make that argument, just because you are of a particular gender, or if you are of a sexual minority, you have the right to be targeted and discriminated against. I think this has to stop, and it has reached very, very dangerous, I would say, and not only unacceptable levels. And I also, however, now point the finger back at me and at all my colleagues across the political divide, that it's also our responsibility to stop that in order to make sure that our children do not grow up in a society that continues to be fueled by such hatred. And this is something that really, really worries me. And I spend most of my day trying to fight against that, understanding that there are things that could be improved, understanding that things have to be criticized, addressed, etc. But you can do that in a way that you have the bigger picture of your country as a whole and the population as a whole in mind, and not only those people who voted you in office and you think you are only accountable to them.
Thank you. Another question that's reached us from a viewer is, should cannabis be legalized for recreational use? Now, I know we're mostly talking about business here, but it's a question that's come in, so I'll put it to you for your thoughts.
I've had the opportunity to answer this question before, and I would first of all make a distinction between legalization and decriminalization. And I would look at the system that we have in place in Malta and how, let's say, how screwed up it is, how we need to fix it, because it has placed young people in jail for very, very non-violent, let's say, petty crimes of possession, and them coming out of our very, let's say, difficult prison reality as a much more hard. I would also not use the word recreational in this context. For me, recreation is sport. For me, recreation is enjoying the countryside with your friends, with your family, with anyone. So I would definitely not use that word. And this is something that we would need to take forward as a debate, look at what other countries have done, learn from their mistakes, listen to scientists, listen also to rehabilitation experts in our family, in our countries. And once we do that, I think we can really, from a non-partisan angle, take this position forward in order to address what society wants and to adapt to its needs. I think if we go into this process in a level-headed, science-based way, we can really start to address the flaws that our system has in this area.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. Coming to the end of our questions now, would you like to become Prime Minister of Malta one day? And if you would, what would be the first thing you would do?
Well, I think the focus at the moment is for the Nationalist Party leader, Bernard Grech, to get rid of, let's say, the mediocrity and arrogance that is currently at the highest level of government of our country. And that is my focus at the moment. And I intend to continue doing that.
Okay. And finally, Roberta, the last question is, a lot of people are struggling at the moment, be it businesses, be it people struggling emotionally because of COVID, mental health issues. They're depressed about the state of things across the island, perhaps even internationally. To round off, what is your advice to people at this admittedly difficult time?
I think the only way out of this crisis is together. We need to be even more supportive than we've been so far. Because there is this sense of fatigue. It's been one whole year. Who would have told us last Easter that we would have a second Easter in these conditions? And we need to be able to listen to each other more and to speak up. You will not be criticized as being negative if you say that things are wrong. You will not be shut out of the stage if you say that things should be better. That is something I can promise, and I will be working towards that in these very challenging few months ahead until we finally start to emerge of this pandemic with the measures that are needed to address all sectors. We have left out so many from our thoughts. So we have misunderstood so many in the way we have addressed their concerns. And this is where we need to really rely on our business partners, our private sector representatives, our public sector speakers and policymakers in order to work together to really emerge from this with solidarity together as a country.
Thank you. Roberta Metsola, as always, it has been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your advice, and thank you for being with me on the Boardroom.
Thank you.
And to all of you watching us at home or at the office, thank you as well for being with us. Thank you for your questions, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Boardroom.